Hello, pod smashers of the internet, and welcome to another episode of
Itty Bit Pod Smash,
Where Gaming Goes to Grab a Beer.
Ooh, that was juicy. There we go.
We are a weekly video game podcast smashing together ideas that you care about with video games. We are your hosts.
Penguin and Termite. I'm Penguin.
And I am Termite. And I did that a little out of order tonight, but here we are nonetheless.
We're here.
And what are we talking about tonight?
Tonight we are going to be talking about a topic that's very recently relevant. It came to mind because of recent world events. It ties kind of like a part 2 bigger version of the episode we had 2 weeks ago talking about ethics and morality and responsibility. Those ideas will be coming up again in this episode. But specifically, we're talking on more of like a global, national, industrial scale. What responsibility do video game companies have when two countries are at war that both have thriving video game market? It's not a circumstance that the video game industry has really faced yet, and we'll jump into it. And we think it's a really interesting discussion, and I'm not quite sure anybody else on the internet's having it. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's because it's not something that really matters to most people, but given the fact that current world events at the time of this podcast recording seem to be indicating that that is a reality that could happen. It might not happen in this conflict, but it is something that is likelier and likelier to happen as the time goes on, right? Humans have never gone very long without having a war. So at some point, video games are going to be around and there's going to be a big war that breaks out between two countries that have it. So we're going to talk about what that looks like as both consumers and the people who make video games and sell them and publish them, and what kind of decisions you might find yourself having to make related to video games as the world descends into chaos.
To capture this moment in time, we are specifically talking about March 2022, and Vladimir Putin of Russia has decided to invade Ukraine for seemingly petty reasons of wanting to capture the land. But you didn't really explicitly say that. You just kind of talked about
didn't because we were going to be saying it in, like I was going to specifically mention that in the in the main topic. But so that said, that's fine because we'll get into that and more. But right now we're Gaming Goes to Grab a Beer. So before we jump into a rather heavy and serious topic, let's talk about what we're drinking tonight.
Which could also be heavy and serious.
Well, I suppose it could be heavy and serious.
I am drinking Basic City beer, which is in Waynesboro. I went there. Yeah. They are awesome. And my family and I went there over the last weekend and had some drinks, ordered some food, and I picked up a 6-pack of this to take with me because I enjoyed it so much. But it's called Uncle Jim's Tavern Ale, and it is an ESB, which I do believe stands for English Standard Bitter, which is just a style of beer that's not very bitter. It's actually very like malty, and it's brown, and it's delicious. And it's just like a beer's beer. It's just a beer. You know, it's not a Pilsner, which is kind of light. It's not like a light beer or like a German style or a Belgian style. It's just a beer. And I love ESBs. A lot of people don't really talk about them, and they're not around a lot. So whenever I do see one on a menu at any brewery, I will order it immediately. Red Dragon in Fredericksburg used to have an amazing one that they haven't had back for a while, at least since we left Fredericksburg. But yeah, so that's what I'm drinking, and I highly recommend it if you're ever in the mountain region, the Shenandoah Blue Ridge area, and get.
Can't imagine any reason why I would ever go there.
I mean, you got roots. But forget me. You have roots. And go to Basic City and check it out.
We still haven't been. Since the pandemic. Since the pandemic, we still have not been, and that's not just due to. At first, it was due to not traveling and not trying to spread a virus. Mm-hmm. It became a matter of, well, my son is still in a position where he can't really drive like 30 minutes down the road without throwing up, even with Dramamine. He's done at least once with Dramamine in his system. Granted, there were other mitigating circumstances that one time, but I just don't know, man. I don't think he's going to really get over it until we're front facing. And even then, I'm not sure. He may just have inherited his mother's frailty. Like, my wife gets car sick. I don't. My family and I could always put my Game Boy, read books, all that stuff. Here. And so anyways, but enough about that. We're talking about beer. Well, I guess my beer thing is short. I'm just having the same Tumbly tropical lager that I got from Center of the Universe. I'll probably be having it to this night and one more night. 2 more nights? I don't know. I was gonna say I thought that we had one last week, and then I had one during our live stream. Which, if you didn't get to see that, by the way, we did a live stream of Elden Ring. It was very fun.
It
We were
was a
joined
good
by
time.
T-Bone and another person who I will not be accused of doxing, because I did find out later who it was.
Yep.
But it is another friend, a person in my life that saw it and decided to join us and be very active in conversation. So that was fun.
It was cool to see old school Twitch numbers, because we used to have a news show and we used to have a weekly live stream on Wednesday nights, and there was a kind of group of people that would show up routinely. None of them were there, which we miss all of you. So come back, please, because your culture and your
always
T-Bone was there. Yeah, T-Bone is the pillar. He's always there. He's awesome and super supportive. Yeah, and the other groups, they weren't there, but we still had the same numbers, which means we got new folks. And that's exciting and awesome. So now if we can just combine, get the old guard back with the new, we could have something
for sure. Actually, and you know what? Along those lines, just kind of as a encouragement to engage with us, and we'll talk more later about some other places where you can engage with us. But I did want to give some feedback, a couple of pieces of feedback actually that different people have given over the podcast, not in necessarily a public way, but in a just in reference to our show. But speaking of which, Flanker Pilot, I think was his Discord name.
Twitch.
Yes, Twitch. His feedback was you guys were really thorough and made a lot of good points in reference to our stream. As someone who does flight sims mostly, I found I had a lot in common with you guys. So that was cool. That was a cool piece of feedback. And then separately, not related to the stream, but just related to the show, we got a piece of feedback that I received from one of my good friends, boyfriends, who recently started listening to the podcast. He's a big Kirby fan. And so he found out we were doing a Kirby episode and he started listening there. And so he's been listening recently as well. But his feedback was, I do have to say, the show makes me appreciate my boyfriend's passion for gaming a little bit more as well, because he's 2 boyfriends. One is not a gamer, one is, and the one who is a gamer I was friends with previously. And so his boyfriend is saying that the appreciation he has for his boyfriend's gaming habits is starting to grow as a result of our show, which is incredible feedback. And then he goes on to say, I think I have, what should I say, an internal bias towards gaming. I think there's a lot more to it than I understand and have been a bit judgmental towards him because of it. So I appreciate your perspectives that you all share, and even just hearing about the different communities in reference to our episode on Richmond, which is, again, awesome, another pull. He said, I was ignorant to their existence, and I'm learning how vast this world of gaming really is. And I think that is probably one of the single best pieces of feedback we've ever received.
Yes, that is amazing.
It's exactly why we do the show, right? We want
that's why we
don't want to necessarily convert him into a gamer or anything like that, but what we want is non-gamers to listen to our show and appreciate gaming and the gamers in their lives a bit more, and realize that there's things about video games that they too can appreciate, even if they don't want to, quote, identify as a gamer. And that's the whole point. Like, games are for everyone. They're not just for gamers. Let me repeat that for those of you in the back. Games are for everyone, not just gamers. So remember that. You know, you don't have to be a gamer to listen to our show. And if you are a gamer, remember that games are for everyone. So don't be a gatekeeper and don't yuck other people's yums, because just because you might not like a certain game experience doesn't mean that it shouldn't be out there. I don't like sports games, but I'm glad that sports games are out there so that people who like them can have those experiences and can play them and can support the various game developers who are making the best versions of them. So then, my encouragement to people who play sports games that, also may not consider themselves gamers. If you're spending more than 20 hours a week, you're probably a gamer, and you should.
That is not a hard number. That's just a fun number.
That's fair.
Made up.
But you should still educate yourself and kind of figure out, learn more about like the industry and the culture, and then how you can contribute to improving games. That would be my encouragement to anybody, of course, but like especially gamers who may not identify as gamers. It's like, you don't have to identify, but you should still like learn more about it so that we can all make this thing a better thing. Whew. That's so on that note, thank you guys, both Flanker Pilot and my friend's boyfriend. Thank you guys for your feedback. We really, really appreciate hearing your thoughts. And if you have feedback, listener, there's lots and lots of places where you can engage with us to tell you what we may mean to you, or better yet, how constructively we can improve ourselves. All that stuff is super valuable to us. And if you just want to troll us or give us a hard time or straight up try to make us quit with your mean, harsh words, bring it on, because
we got some thick skin.
Yeah, I got. The skin is thick as here. And listen, I have no lack of means to secure lots and lots of tissues, and I will quit this show when there are no more tissues in the world for me to dry my tears. So there you go.
Yeah,
so tenaciously,
we're not going anywhere.
Awesome.
No, that is a wonderful piece of feedback. Wonderful news. Like you said, that is the exact reason why I wanted to have this show to begin with. My analogy is that when I was a kid, I could not go into Target or Walmart and see Mario pajamas and toys, Lego Mario. Like, video games were a very nerd, quote unquote, thing. I was made fun of for playing video games. I wasn't like, it was not mainstream at all. And now it really is. And so our generation is now passing on this love of gaming to those that are coming ahead of us, to the younger generations. So our peers are now mostly parents and or adults. Gaming has a place in the world. We want to make aware and make known to everyone what gaming is, what it can offer as a art form and as intermedia pop culture world spheres. And that is exactly the kind of feedback I'd love to hear, because it's working. It's exactly what we're doing. So even if you have zero interest in gaming, come hang out with us and learn about what is out there.
Like the other piece of feedback we got, just because your taste may not align with ours, hopefully our ideas align with your ideas as well, which is kind of what Flanker Pilot was getting at, was like, you guys have a lot of the same thoughts I have, even though I play mostly flight simulators.
Yeah,
so that's awesome. Anyways, just to remind you, some house cleaning. We have officially started streaming again. It's not taking the same form as it did before, where we were doing weekly Wednesday live streams. Now we're still doing it on Wednesdays, but it's going to be once a month. It's going to be a bigger event. We're going to fold it into something we've kind of wanted to do for a while in a proper context, which is reviews of games. And so you might have seen that we posted a bonus episode. That was the recording of the review portion of our live stream. And so that kind of thing will continue. And next month, probably are we going to do Horizon next month, or do you want to skip right ahead to Tina's?
Ooh, well, Tina has the bonus, like, co-op. We can play a game together.
Yeah, co-op.
Whereas Horizon, both of us are playing our single player games again, like we did with Elden Ring. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. Maybe we could leave it up to the audience, and whatever, even if it's only one person that gives us a choice, that will be the winner. So I think our audience should tell us what they want to see a review.
Alternatively, we could do like Horizon isn't necessarily one that I feel like we need to play. So maybe we just we do like a review of it separate, right? Just like a bonus recording. A review, because it's more like I have more to say about the story of Horizon than I do.
And that's its
about
strong point.
The rest of its stuff. Yeah. So we'll see. We'll figure it out. That's the thing. It's a work in progress. It's going to iterate and take many forms. And we haven't really gotten a lot of feedback as to whether or not our listeners would prefer like Twitch over YouTube over Facebook. I'm platform agnostic at this point. I'm open to whatever. So Twitch is kind of our default, just because we've been doing it for a while. But that kind of feedback is, if it would be easier for you to watch us on YouTube live stream than on Twitch or on Facebook, then please let us know that feedback too. So lots of things that you all can share with us. So if we don't hear anything, if we hear just crickets for the next couple of weeks, then
we're just gonna do our own thing.
That's par for the course.
The show must go on.
Yeah, the show must go on. Exactly. It'll continue to go on the way it has gone on, because or as we continue to iterate, it's fine. All those things, Twitch or live streaming, doing game reviews, and getting awesome feedback from great listeners is our favorite thing. But
80-bit Pod Smash is our favorite thing.
80-bit Pod Smash is our favorite thing.
80-bit Pod Smash, favorite things.
All right, favorite things. It's a chance for us to kind of share something possibly non-game related that we have discovered this week, though that doesn't rule out game related stuff, but that we are digging, that we are sinking our teeth into, that we are obsessed with, that has intrigued us, inspired us, and so that we hope we sharing these things so that you might be inspired to go out and find your next favorite thing, whether it's similar or 100% identical or completely the opposite. Because that grapefruit mocha coffee that Termite drank that he was raving about sounds awful, so I'm gonna go find the opposite of that to get joy out of life and rub it in his face. So that's it. Right. Go rub your joy in Termite's face, and we'll tell you different things that we're going to rub in your face with our joy. Joyce will rub in your face. Yeah. What's the joy you want to rub in our listeners' face tonight, Termite?
Suddenly, that wasn't an awkward transition at all. Everyone is aware and
the
buzzing.
Worst explanation I've ever done.
Yeah, pretty much. I'm just gonna leave that there.
I probably won't edit it out. It's
perfect.
Remarkable. It's remarkably bad, but it's remarkable nonetheless.
Yep. It's good. Negative attention is still attention.
I promise you guys I will never do that again, but I might leave it in this episode. All right, buzzing. What are we buzzing about?
Everyone's buzzing about Drive to Survive. It's a Formula One docuseries on Netflix. People who I would never have expected to even give a rip about racing at all, the motorsports, love this docuseries. And yes, I have started it, and I appreciate it. We got like 2 episodes in, and I want to jump back into it. I want to watch more. I just haven't made time for it. Also, and this is my actual favorite thing, what did just drop, if you like Drive to Survive and you are not generally a motorsports fan, there is a NASCAR docuseries on Bubba Wallace, which made me relive all of 2020 again, because NASCAR, I don't know if you all know this, has gone through a massive transition and is still in the middle of a transition. And it is centered around the political and cultural events of 2020, mostly because of the ambition of one driver who happens to be the only Black American driver in the series. His name is Bubba Wallace, and it's all about how he has used his influence and his platform to make major, ridiculously good change for the entire NASCAR brand and sport and what it is now turning into. And it is incredible. NASCAR is the best it's been in years this year in new season, and I'm loving it. So it started with that. My wife actually watched all of it too, who is like not NASCAR fan at all, although she has gone to a race, which is if you were there or a part of our friend group who's listening to the show and remembers that NASCAR race, it was one for the books. It was quite the tailgate, and we had a blast. But other than that, she's not generally a NASCAR or motorsports fan, and yet appreciated the Bubba Wallace docuseries as well. So it's 1 season. It's pretty quick, like 4 to 6 episodes long, and it just goes through. It's mostly well done. It's not the best documentary ever, but it's incredible for what it says and how using just another look into what happened to us as a society in 2020. So
cool.
Lots of good things.
I thought you were going to say everyone's buzzing about Will Smith punching Chris Rock.
It's happening, but that's not really related to my favorite thing.
I know. Well, that's what I thought when you started saying. Right. I was like, oh, that's what he's going to go with. And it was not that, which is not fine. Because that whole situation's a mess and kind of dumb. And
to say the least.
All right, let's see. My favorite thing is I have been inundated in D&D culture this week. I've gotten to sink my teeth this weekend into Tiny Tina's Wonderland. I've been watching a 100% certified fresh TV show on Amazon Prime called Legend of Vox Machina, which is like a close tie for my favorite thing. You all should go check it out. You should check it out. It's amazing.
Yeah, I want to. It's on my list.
It's amazing. It's so good. In fact, I was just watching an episode now and was like raging that I had to turn it off and come record this stupid podcast. I'm just kidding. I love the podcast, but it was hard to step away from the episode.
Tell me how you really feel.
The third D&D thing is I actually played D&D 5e for the first time. I've played tabletop RPG before, but it was Pathfinder with our good friend Nick Peach. Shout out Nick. Was wonderful. Was a blast. Dude lives in Croatia. Super hard to get games together with him. So I did. So I'm not cheating on you, Nick. I still want to play Pathfinder again at some point in my life.
Me too.
Did want to. I got invited by a buddy of mine to come play D&D 5e, and it was my first time. I also got my wife to come, and it's my friend Nate, who is my lawyer friend. So his girlfriend and my wife get along, so they all invited us to a D&D campaign with a couple of his brothers. One of his brothers was being the dungeon master, and it was so fun. I don't know if it's a difference between Pathfinder and 5e, but I do get the feeling that Pathfinder was specifically spun off because it was more like rule heavy and like sticklery for the rules, and that's fine because I totally like that like experience and the difficulty that comes with just the very, very, very brutal and unforgiving rules. I'm a Souls fan after all. But 5e does seem like it's more focused on letting you have a bit more freedom to have fun. And that's the experience I had with it. It was so much fun. Granted, some of that depends on your DM, I imagine. But I definitely just had a really good time. I got to get the killing blow on the boss. The final boss of our campaign was a unsuccessfully polymorphed bed that had been attempted to be polymorphed into a dragon. Yeah, that's right. A bed, like a mattress and springs and wood. And it had been partially turned into a dragon that we, of course, dubbed the Bed Dragon. And my half halfling, half werewolf, also known as a half and half, rage beast barbarian, got the killing blow with a critical 20 for the record. So, of course, he was able to, it was a big deal, a natural 20. So, of course, I was given a little bit of creative liberty to decide how exactly I brutalized this big dragon. And I decided to say I knocked its head into the air with my maul with one of my hits because it was a 2-hit move. And then I jumped into the air, sunk my claws into its face, and then defied physics, which I felt permitted to do because I rolled a natural 20, so of course I get to defy physics. And I spun my tiny halfling body in the air and then completely chucked the dragon against a wall, and it shattered into 1,000 splinters.
Nice.
And earned me the title Mattress Bane, the Poly Unmorpher. So yeah, nice. It was it was a great campaign. It's fun when you get together with people who jive well with your creativity and just kind of create a story together. That's what I love about tabletop RPGs. It's unlike there's very few experiences out there like tabletop RPGs, and I am kicking myself for not having gotten into it earlier in life because I do feel like I'm a natural fit for it, and I want to try my hand at DMing. I'm gonna learn Termite. I'm already downloading the resources, and I'm gonna learn it. I'm gonna read the handbook.
It's such a commitment. It is a lot.
It is a lot, but
you have to know everything: limitations, edge cases. Stories, campaigns.
There's number one, there's a lot of resources out there that help. I mean, you basically have a Wikipedia of resources out there at your fingertips, and Google is amazing, right? But also you can, again, like I said, the Dungeon Master actually has a lot of freedom to be a bit more loose with the rules. If there's rules he or she doesn't like, they can change them, alter them, change them, make them work a bit more for them. And they're called house rules. So I'm into it. So I want to learn, and hopefully I'll get a chance to have you and others as my guinea pigs. Maybe we'll have an 80-bit Pod Smash dungeon game and dragon game.
Yes. I'm here.
All right. All right. Well, so that's favorite things. Let's move us to our final segment, which we got to try to rush through, but it shouldn't be a terribly involved one, so we can kind of make it work for us for time. But that's our final segment, which is DLC.
Downloadable content. That is our extra funny little bit. Both of our names are Dan, so we describe a fun little extra piece of content that is either related to or not our topic, and tonight is definitely not our topic. Sorry, I just jumped into introducing it because it was my idea, and I just went with it.
Yeah, good job. Thank you for doing it, and also because I am not allowed, apparently, after the last one to explain what our segments mean. At least
that's true, yeah.
So your explanation was the best explanation of anything on this podcast tonight. So good job.
Hey, about that. Hey, thanks. I'll take it.
All right, what's your idea? So what's your DLC?
It was inspired by the gaming subreddit because someone posted it, and I was like, that sounds like a fun bit. And it is this. If real life had a platinum trophy, because you and I are trophy hunters. Yes, you are too, even if you might not admit it.
No, I admit it. I acknowledge it. I am a platinum hunter.
If real life had a platinum, what would the trophies be? What would it include to get said platinum?
So can we both agree that by listing these out, my one disclaimer is that just because it was something we list on this trophy is not something that you have achieved personally, it does not mean you are a failure or had a partial life, right? Like
this is exactly why this conversation is awesome, because I think what you're describing is decisions that individuals would make that would actually lock them into a lifestyle or a path isn't for everyone.
Unlike starting a new game plus, you
don't get a chance to unwind.
There's no evidence that we get a second chance at that after we beat the game, so to speak, or finish the game. So all I'm saying though is that what this is helpful because again, there are plenty of platinum trophies out there that some people have gotten and some haven't, and that doesn't mean that the people who didn't get it didn't have a good experience with the game, right? That's, I feel like, a fair statement. You can have a complete and full and fulfilling experience with any game without getting the platinum trophy. The platinum is just that extra little bit for people who want to go after it. So I feel like that's applicable to life too, right? You can have a completely filling, satisfying, and wonderful life and never get the quote platinum trophy at life. And that's just for the people who are crazy a-holes who feel the need to rub it in other people's faces, I guess. So what is that? What are those achievements? Whoa. I feel like there are going to be the basic bronze ones you unlock for just completing the major milestones, right? Learned how to walk. That's right out of the tutorial mission, right? said first 100 words, right? So all those like milestones as kids, went through puberty. And then, of course, some of the more advanced ones, like completed an education. I'm not even going to say college. I'm going to say completed an education. That could be, also like trade school or learned a skill or whatever, right? So I would say that's a general enough one. Right. Yeah. So achieved a certificate of education of some kind, right? Or unlocked the max rank of a skill. How about that? That's like the equivalent, right? Unlocked the max rank of a skill. And then, so what are some of yours here? I just
there's lifestyle things. So like I was thinking of marriage, or like what that would, maybe not, that's not for everyone. And so I kind of tried to abstract what that would entail, that actually
fell in love,
capture, right? And it would be like, and not necessarily falling in a romantic love, like a relationship, like had a successful relationship where like it required work. You worked through differences. Maybe you committed to one another. Maybe you're just roommates. Like maybe it's a family member, or so like you have to abstract.
Yeah, I feel like it's got to be.
Down.
I feel like you could only earn it though when you've genuinely done something that demonstrates your like putting someone else's interest over yours for the sake of the fact that you just love them, right? Like it has to be that. It can't just be like, like, oh, like exactly. It can't just be, oh, I got married, so therefore I unlocked the trophy. It's like, no, that moment in your marriage when you genuinely decided to put your self-interest aside and do something, move away from your family to pursue a job with this person, because even though you didn't want to, you like loved them enough that you were willing to do that. Boom, trophy unlocked. Right?
Yeah, it would be like, and you wouldn't even know it was coming. It's just like, oh, my roommate and I have had this tuffle about something, or like someone you're living with, or a family member, and you just do something that's super self-sacrificial
just because you love them, right? Just because you're like, you know what, I care for this person, I don't want them to have a bad day. Boom, trophy unlocked. Oh, nice. Yeah. No, I'm into it. Yeah, that's a good one.
So that was something I was thinking about, like learning how to drive is kind of an achievement that'd be kind of fun to throw on the list, because not everyone needs to or has the desire, and sometimes people don't have the privilege to learn how to drive. But it's on the list because like, if you come from a society that doesn't require driving, or you can't afford a car, you could still take a class, or you could even raise money to do the class. So I feel like the barrier of entry exists. It's just enough to like hump over to make it a trophy. To like,
I would say something as well as like navigated without GPS right? Just something where so whether you live in a city or whether you live or whether you have a car, there's gonna be I feel like there's always gonna be a time where you're gonna be tested in your ability to navigate terrain without the assistance of a computer, right? Like that might mean your phone died and you don't have access to your GPS, or your signal's busted and you can't seem to pull it up and you just need to figure it out based on the landscape. I feel like that would also be like a good achievement as well, because these are things that you may never experience, but like if you do, like, or if you find it, or if again you're like, oh, here's the list of trophies, I'm gonna go after that one because like I think I can do it, right? Like that's kind of if the list existed, then people, even if they were harder or obscure, people would pursue them. But they shouldn't be things that like really, really require. I don't know. They shouldn't be things like, I would say the love one is a better version of, instead of because the marriage one, like it could get dark really fast, right? Like if there was an actual trophy out there for getting married, then like people would do terrible things, right? Like
get married for the trophy and then leave.
Right, exactly. It's like, no, you can't do that. So do we make this really, really hard and just say you can't get the trophy until you die, because like death is going to be a trophy on there?
Of course. Right. Yeah. Death has to be on the list for sure. Like there's a gold trophy for dying.
You die. You made it to the end. Rolled credits.
Right. You've rolled credits on life. Yeah.
Now, if you want to be really cruel, you put in 3 different endings, so nobody will ever get the platinum trophy.
Well, that's messed up. That's not in the spirit of what this is. You get a platinum if you do these things. My other fun idea is something related to the sky, whether it's flying, hot air balloon, parasailing, like that's something that puts you in the air. And it's kind of nervous, kind of scary, a little bit out of your comfort zone.
Called Defying Gravity. That's the name of the.
There you go.
Defying Gravity.
And my other one was an idea that I'd bounce off of you. It has to do with children. All of the things related to children. There are so many people in the world who will never have kids for whatever reason, and that's fine. So I was thinking of a DLC trophy list that's separate from life, that has all the child, like anything to do with children, like getting possessing, guarding, whatever you want to call it, guardianship.
There is definitely got to be at least one trophy in the main list, though, related to like teaching a child something. I feel like every human being should strive to, if you want to consider yourself an achieved quote unquote platinum human being, then you gotta have at least like taught a kid something. It doesn't have to be anything elaborate. It doesn't have to be anything profound, but like passing information passing something onto the next generation is gotta be on the list, right?
And most otherwise, why are we here? There's nieces and nephews, there's cousins. Like you're gonna have an interaction with a child.
If you live your entire life without interaction with with a child, then I pity you, because good Lord, children are great, and even if you don't want to produce your own, a totally agreeable and understandable decision, you should engage in. You should pass something on to the next generation. That's like. That is like human prime directive number one. That's why we're here, is because we decided to both create and pass on information to our kids, whether they were ours or not. And it takes a village, right?
It could be as simple as like the child group going through an old folks home, and you are in the old folks home having spent an entire life without children, and suddenly you're like forced to interact with these kids. Boom, there's your chance. Get the trophy.
Yep,
do it.
Go. Boom, get the trophy. Yep, absolutely. Yep. So cool. All right. Well, that is probably enough time for that. That is a nice, hopefully happy discussion. Before we jump into something that is a really tough conversation, I think it'll be good. I think it'll be interesting, but war sucks. Like, and that's what our conversation is going to be about tonight. So let's jump in then to this conversation that obviously has nothing to do with our DLC.
Right.
Because nobody, on no one's no trophy list for life achievements should ever have to be anything related to fighting in a war. That is something that no one should ever have to, I think, go through. And, again, people probably have a good idea. Our longtime listeners have probably a pretty good idea of our political alignment, more or less, if you've been listening for a long time. And I know that our side of the political spectrum sometimes does get critical of, wartime politics, I should say. But I've always been a big supporter of, the people who do fight in our wars, and the people who make that sacrifice to give their lives, whether they actually have died or not, they still sacrifice something to make sure that we are safe from people who would do us harm, right? So on the outset, no matter how critical I may be of any government in tonight's episode, just know that the actual boots on the ground, those guys are heroes, as far as I'm concerned. All right. Well, then, my disclaimer is woof. I just wrote woof. We are not qualified to necessarily, we're not experts in any of these fields that we're going to be discussing tonight. Neither of us have served in the military. I know that you have activities that support military, so you probably interact with a lot of people in the military on a regular basis. But neither of us are, military experts or war historians or anything like that. But everyone should be enabled to talk about these topics. So, sorry, do you have thoughts?
Affects everyone, right? Yeah. So my thoughts. I will say declaratively that I am a pacifist, and I'm actually like very much against all war. In fact, there should always be diplomacy over war, and people should treat each other like human beings, and there should be there should be no situation that it should boil to the point of pointing a gun at someone and taking their life, like soldier or not. And I'm only okay in my work, in my industry, and what I do for a living as a defense contractor because it's in the world of defense. And I'm not oblivious to the reality of the fact that there are human beings who do want to threaten the lives of others. And I stand on the side of, I'm going to put a shield up and help save lives. Nothing I do is directly related to any weapons at all. Nothing offensive whatsoever. So I'm okay in what I'm doing morally in my own checks. But just any sort of political spectrum or anything, it's probably no question here that I've side extraordinarily left, and I am on the pacifist side. I do not enjoy war. I don't think we should be going after that. I don't celebrate it. It is sad and maddening to think that people's lives are being completely ruined and ripped apart because of one madman who lives in a powerful country who happens to run that country.
No, it's complicated in war.
It is.
Even, I wouldn't necessarily call myself a pacifist. I do think that there are times when fighting as nations is, if not the right thing to do, is the thing that must be done. But that said, the realities of war are also not lost on me, right? And I also believe there is a very, very, there should be a much lower barrier of entry, so to speak, for war crimes, right? What I mean by that is like war crimes. Like there's also a right and a wrong way to fight wars, right? And there should be many more things that are considered war crimes that are not currently. It's so complicated, and we're not going to necessarily get into the merits or demerits of war. We're going to acknowledge that war sucks. We also have to acknowledge that war is a reality that we have had the privilege of never having to have knock on our doorstep in a tangible way. I say that as myself, not we collectively as everybody. I mean, simply in my life, the closest war I think has ever gotten to my life was like 9/11, right?
Right.
And even then, that was hundreds of miles to the north of where I lived at the time. So. So anyways, so we're going to talk about that. Really quick, though, did you ever have any families that served in the military or fought in any wars? It could be. Oh,
yes, actually. My grandfather fought in World War II. He fought in Germany.
My great-grandfather fought in World War I think, and then my grandfather fought in World War II. And then my dad served in the Air Force in the 70s. Late 70s, something like that. Yeah. So out of college, I think, or not college. He didn't go to college. Out of high school, he served in the Air Force, and then So that I've got a quite a long history of military service in my family. I think I'm the first Grathwall male to not be serving in the military.
Yeah.
In like 3 generations or 4 generations. So. Cool. That is a privileged statement,
right?
Because the decades leading up to my life were not peaceful. Well, then, great. Speaking of peacetime and wars, how many the crux of our discussion here really rests on this one little kind of juicy tidbit, and that is how many wars have been fought, and I mean between kind of major global conflicts that had effects on the global market. I'm not talking about the kind of like civil war here or invasion here, no matter how important those may be to the arc of history. I'm kind of talking about the big ones, right? That everyone talks about, that the Western civilization kind of consider, because video gaming more or less came out of Western civilization. So Japan being, of course, the big major exception there. Nevertheless, it was the West's influence on Japan that created the fertile ground for the gaming industry. So we'll consider it a Western thing. So big major wars that affected Western civilization. How many of them have been there since video games cropped up in the mid to late 70s? And then how many of those were between countries that had thriving video game markets at the time? So it's kind of 2 questions in one. What do you think? I mean, I put down kind of a list of the major ones that I'm aware of, but if I left any off my list, I put down.
Super like ignorant on like war history, most history in general. Actually, it did not interest me as a scholar in school. And yes, everyone is a scholar when you're in
of course
grade school and college.
Student is the general word, but
I would vastly love to go back and revisit all of my college life and take history way more seriously than I did. But anyway, you listed them here. It looks like we have the Korean War, the Gulf War, the war in Afghanistan, the Iraqian War, I should say, Cold War with Russia ending in the 80s. Those are, I think you nailed it.
That's like about it, right? Yeah. No, that's and again, if we're leaving any off the list, again, pardon our ignorance. We kind of listed the ones that we have kind of recognized that kind of had major impact. Yeah, I mean, and then as far as wars that had powers that both had thriving video game markets, none of them, right? None of them. Iraq and Afghanistan, though I'm sure there were people who were buying and playing and enjoying video games there, they weren't considered like it wouldn't have been a big deal if we were like, oh, we're not going to sell video games in Afghanistan anymore. Like, and yes, Russia, of course, we had a Cold War with Russia during the time video games were emerging, but Russia wasn't making video games or buying video games from America at the time. If they had games, I mean,
Tetris is from Russia.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Well, but it wasn't marketed towards Russia.
It was made in Russia.
It's a Russian product. I didn't know that. That's interesting. Yeah. That is very, very interesting. I didn't know that. It probably wasn't like a big deal for Russians to sell that to the West by the time Tetris really kind of hit it. And it wasn't like Western industry was like, oh no, they're holding back Tetris from us because we're in a Cold War with them, right? It wasn't that big of a deal. I mean, the industry itself was smaller at the time. So
I mean it was really made in 1984, which would argue is after the Cold War
near the end. Definitely, it was ramping down. 89 is typically considered when the wall fell as kind of the end of the Cold War. But you're right, it was definitely winding down by then. So so that's just to say that like what is happening now. So you mentioned it on the onset of the episode. Russia, which is now a fairly large video game market. Lots of people in both Russia and Eastern Europe in general over the last 20, 30 years. It has become a pretty fairly big market for video games. And last month, Russia invaded a NATO ally, Ukraine, their neighbor, and sparking what could be the start of one of the next major big conflicts. It could also not be the start of the next major conflict, but it's a big deal because for the first time that I'm aware of, this action by Putin in Russia has prompted video game publishers and video game developers to suspend major video game developers. We're talking Activision Blizzard, Ubisoft, yeah.
Microsoft, EA.
Okay, yeah. So pretty much all the major video game publishers have announced that they are going to suspend all sales of video games in Russia. They're not selling games there anymore. That's a big deal. I know people are talking about that, but like, they're responding to something happening in the world, right? Like, they didn't do it when, the Uyghurs were being killed by China, genocided in China. They didn't do it after the Hong Kong debacle. Like, they didn't do it at all in China. Maybe China's too big of a market to sacrifice for. But like, Ukraine is now at war with Russia. And so they've said, that is apparently enough is enough, in that particular context. So again, maybe the Russian market isn't that big, but let's jump into it. Like,
there's another giant aspect of our gaming industry now that is very different than it ever has been before. And that is just the global connectedness of both the devs and publishers, but also the streamers, the YouTubers, the content creators,
the internet,
and the internet, right? So we're much more aware of what's going on, and the posturing of like developers and publishers pulling support,
the political
or not
pressure
games.
is much heavier when the internet's involved.
Yeah, it's so much bigger of a move now. Like, if you'd have looked back at the Cold War in the 80s when Nintendo was pretty much it, because the crash in 1983 where like Atari and ColecoVision and all these other companies, pretty much like retailers didn't want games in their stores anyway because they were just collecting dust. No one wanted them. Nintendo came in and like resurrected the gaming industry. That was Japan, and they were selling to the world, and it would not have mattered. Like, okay, Nintendo's not going to sell to Russia. No one would have cared. No one would have paid any attention. It's not big enough. It's not going to get enough attention. It wouldn't have mattered. Where now we have big, huge, massive conglomerates of publishers and development studios and people all interconnected over the internet, where like money can really be stopped in a pretty big way. When you have these acquisitions that are going out, like the gaming industry is now, I don't even know how many billions of dollars the entire gaming industry collectively has in revenue, but it has
more
weight. It has a lot of weight, and to completely separate an entire country,
grossing when you factor in mobile gaming, it's way higher than, I think it's movies. It's pretty much every movies, TV, every other entertainment form combined still doesn't crack video games. That's insane.
$180 billion is the games market. 180 billion. Is the revenue, which is an astronomically huge amount of money that gets generated just by video games.
But the fact that they've done it, right? The fact they've said, in Russia's case, enough is enough. We're not going to sell games there on what appears to be ethical grounds. It brings up the question then. It has set a precedent, so therefore it brings up the question, which is our next one. Do video game companies have an ethical responsibility to take such actions, such as suspending sales or even ending partnerships with countries or affiliated companies that operate within those countries who are engaging in warlike behavior or are on the other side of an international conflict than they are? And should consumers buy products from companies that our country is at war with, that we are at war with? Are you, should you basically contribute to the economy of a country that our country's at war with? Whew, big question, big, hard, complicated question. Let's sink our teeth into it.
So you're saying if these companies had not made the move to stop contributing to the Russian economy, would we as individuals then take the reins to like
no.
Not
I'm saying now that they've done it with Russia, if we in the next 10 years have a conflict with a much, much bigger and more sacrifice requiring a conflict, such as China, what if the United States and NATO go to war with China tomorrow? Or next year, right? Are we now we are now, we're enemies, right? Like Microsoft, Blizzard, all these American-based companies are now at war with one of their biggest markets. And to fuel the economy of that market would literally be to fuel a war effort against oneself, right? What do? You suspend sales in China?
You have to start by looking at the reasons why this would affect them. And there's a couple of things going on here. So I'll just use the Russia example because it's what's happening in front of us. But when the video game developers stop contributing to Russia, as far as like offering a new game, like Gran Turismo 7 was one of the big games releases that just never got to Russia. And just by removing that, the people in Russia who would have bought Gran Turismo 7, a portion of that money would have gone to the government, therefore supporting the military of our enemy. NATO enemy in that situation, not necessarily. I mean, I guess
technically Ukraine's enemy at this point,
right?
Though Ukraine is
the
a NATO
bad guy
ally.
For
NATO officially has not. Right.
Yeah. And then so that's one aspect. Is like you are actually hurting the government's economy by not contributing money. Even if it does seem minuscule, it's kind of a moral principle, or maybe there's a viewpoint out there that's virtue signaling because the amount of money the government would actually see from that sale of a game is so minuscule it wouldn't matter, and you end up hurting the players and the people like you and I who don't want the war to happen but happen to live in Russia and don't agree with Putin at all but happen to live in Russia. You're now putting them at risk for enjoying entertainment and segregating them from the art form and the stories of our world, which is kind of like not burning books, but like you would stop the sale of books or music. And there was actually something that happened in like the 60s around Vietnam that had something to do with music and using music as a way to protest the war and spread ideas and art and love and all those things. And like cutting a country off from that would hurt its people culturally more than it would hurt the government or stop the war
in
effort.
all likelihood, in a circumstance like that, like China or Russia or whomever would probably just cut off,
which they do anyway.
Of any products.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
And then the other aspect of that is to make the people miss the product so much that they would then in turn be infuriated that their government is doing something silly, and you would kind of put social pressure against the government from inside. So you would influence the Russian people. They're angry at Sony for doing that. And so therefore they're mad at Putin for making a stupid decision. Like, I can't play my games. I hate this government. What am I doing here? Putin, you suck. Like, maybe
your actions
and that's you can't measure that. There's no quantifiable like statistic that shows like these swath of people decided they hate Russia and their own government now, and they live there and they hate because they can't play their video games. I don't know if that
but
happens,
like making the quality of life. Sure, and it may not be like a direct one-to-one correlation of like or causal link, right? Like, but it could be one factor contributing to the overall dissatisfaction in the country, which does
right.
The dissatisfaction of the population is a huge effect. Now with Russia, it's a much more clear-cut example, right? Or with this current conflict with Ukraine, it's like, he kind of decided to do this, and his reasons for doing it are very flimsy and have letting Ukraine be has no effect on the Russian people, right? And everybody sees through it, right? He's claiming something Nazis. The Ukrainian government is run by Nazis, and so in order to protect our people from Nazism, we have to take our vastly superior military force and crush them into heel, and then keep the land while we're at it, right? Like that's his. It's like what? That's his entire reason for going to war, and nobody's buying it. So he's generally making the lives of his people worse for his own political ambitions or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's a bit more clear cut. But in a country like China that has brainwashed their population pretty effectively, and even if they haven't, the Chinese people many Chinese people throughout their lifetime support the CCP because they saw the CCP take them from like an agrarian, poor farming civilization to now one of the world's strongest economies, right? Like to them, the CCP has done everything right, and so of course they would back them because they've made their lives better. So it's not even necessarily in every case a brainwashing thing, but it's just like, okay, well, I support my government. Sure, I might lose out on playing games, but like in our minds we would think the same. We would be doing the same mental gymnastics, so to speak, on our end too. Like, right, like we're not going to buy any games from China because we don't want to contribute to their war effort. We're at war with them, whatever. It's going to suck because some good stuff either comes out of China or is like helped at least partially funded by China. So it's like you kind of do these mental gymnastics for your quote side if you support them, and that is a reality, right, that we all kind of face. But I do think there is absolutely there's some ethical responsibility to at least like consider the points you're saying, right? Like there's good arguments on both sides, I think, of like doing it or not doing it. As far as I'm concerned, what do I think? Like, at the end of the day, because you're right, there's kind of like on the one hand, like, you are maybe in some part only hurting, people, the government gets to tax anything that comes into their country and is sold in their country. So they're making a dime off of anything sold in their country.
Yeah.
So again, it may not be a lot in the long run, but the video game industry is a $180 billion industry. So, it may not be huge in Russia, but in China it would be a huge deal.
Right.
So, or who knows, I can't really think of many. I can think of a lot of countries that probably hate us, but I can't think of many of the kind of big economic countries that would go to war with us other than China and Russia at this point. So I don't know, man. Yeah. I mean, that's why we decided to have this topic, is because it's so it's complicated. It's not too complicated that I don't think we can get our heads around it, but it certainly has. This particular question is one that I've been like mulling over. Is like, my gut instinct is to say, yes, of course there are enemies. Don't sell to them. Don't buy from them. But
Right.
it's trickier than that. You're right. There's more pieces at play. So I don't know if I have an exact answer to this question, but those are kind of my thoughts around that question.
Yeah, it goes back to like what I was saying in our ethics morality discussion about being informed and knowing what, and you and I have the luxury of being informed with the gaming industry because we have this podcast with which we're already have an ear to the ground on the industry. We know these developers, these publishers, but Mama Jane down at Walmart who's buying a game for their grandkid has no clue who Ubisoft is versus EA. And if one of those two major publishing companies decide to do business with Russia, she has no clue that the game that she just bought is going to have money funded directly to a possible enemy country. But is she guilty of that? Or is it EA or Ubisoft, the publisher? Is it their responsibility to say, no, we don't like this? And then you look at like the globalization of the industry when you have companies like CD Projekt Red who are in Poland, and like, do they pull, what is their relationship with Russia? And then I'm buying a game that contributes to the Polish government. So like, what if in a crazy scenario, a country gets pulled into a wartime situation that I don't agree with, and they're not really the people at play. They're kind of a victim too.
Sure.
And then, it gets really crazy. And that's, I go back to The Good Place again, where there's so many unintended consequences to everything we do.
Sure.
And the big elephant in the room is that China has slave labor camps, and literally every piece of technology our fingers touch is comes from exploitation of individuals and humanity. The selling of organs happen out there. Like, it's really dark and it's really dire. It's a major humanitarian issue, but there's nothing we can do about it because our entire livelihoods, if you work from home, are on the backs of that. All of the network technology and switches and internet, like all of that stuff that has circuit boards and electronics is that. And so you can't just like
part of that makes me think that like war with China is not an inevitability, only because like we're so dependent on them, they're so dependent on it. We're so interdependent at this point that it would be almost mutually assured destruction at this point, at least economically speaking. Maybe not in the same way like nuclear war would be, but in definitely the way of like our economy and their economy would both like crumble overnight if we were to go to war with them. But then again, I don't know if on a global level, I don't see humanity advancing off of this planet while both China, Russia, and the United States with such conflicting ideologies exist. I don't see us unifying enough to actually like progress as a species in the way that we should be. Right? Does that make sense? Like, it's kind of that elephant in the room. Like, it's sort of if I was telling a story right now of like three big kingdoms on a world and they had such conflicting ideologies, you'd think, oh, it's a Chekhov's gun. They're going to go to war at some point. Like, it kind of feels that way. It's like, but part of me is like, I kind of was thinking about what you were saying about the, like, oh, depriving the people of stuff. I'm like, the chaotic good person in me says, you're right. We stop all sales. We deprive the people of their ability to buy the games. And then we spread the awesome video game propaganda that we're developing to make them dissatisfying their government. We start going bootlegging it. We start flooding their country with bootlegged free copies of whatever video games that we're making that we want to spread our message. And just blah blah blah. Yeah, that's my hot chaotic good take on it.
Another thing about specifically with Russia, it's another caveat, is what effect does, or what is the cost, right, and this goes back to that some people do have the viewpoint that these companies are just virtue signaling, and I want to give that kind of thought because there's a lot of people out there that have that viewpoint. And I want to say that Russia's not even on the top 10 of the GNP, like gross national product, in money or like in revenue or government size. Russia's not even in the top 10 prior to this war, and now they're even gutted more. So there are, like, I don't even know what rank they are, but it's not the top 10 because I'm looking at that now as far as like government money. Germany is fourth place, like, and Germany is a tiny size compared to Russia. So go ahead. What were you gonna say?
I was just gonna say we could frame that in the next question because that fits.
Oh yeah, go for it.
With our next question.
What's next? Yeah,
I was gonna say what are the dangers and sacrifices that a company might have to make when they act against their nation's potential enemies? Again, the situation with Russia may not be to the point where we are like they are our enemies, so we're gonna stop. But they're still acting as if they're our enemies, and so
right.
Like, what are the sacrifices? What's the danger? And then the other end of that question is, what are the dangers if they don't do those things? So, yeah. And so continue.
Yep. So I'm going to quote this article on arstechnica.com that was posted this month. Game industry unites behind call to cut off Russian market. They say while Russia is a significant and growing market for major game publishers, the country doesn't even crack the top 10 nations by game industry revenues, according to 2021. In an investor note, CD Projekt Red noted that Russian and Belarusian customers accounted for 5.4% and 3.7% respectively of the entire company's sales in the last year. So like that's tiny. That's okay. So if CD Projekt Red says
4, that's almost 10% between the two of them still though. That's a tenth of you. If I were to say I'm going to take a tenth of your money right now, you'd punch me in the face, right?
Well, it's a potential it's like cutting out the potential sales of up to 10% of your market. So it doesn't necessarily translate directly to a 10% loss in sales. It's just by cutting these folks out, this is like the market share is different from the actual like amount of money. Because there's a cost savings also in like not marketing and not actively pursuing that market that you would also win back. Like, so you have to do the entire like holistic approach to your entire business when it comes to taking out
video gamers.
It's not just like cutting sales
to be quite resilient in regards to how their deals impact their purchasing decisions, right? Like if Activision Blizzard could not lose sales on certain games after the crap they've pulled over the last few years, I can't imagine that like CD Projekt Red's going to lose more sales over the Cyberpunk debacle than probably continuing to sell games.
But that again puts it all into perspective. That shows you how little a Russian boycott or like stopping the sales of your games and stopping the marketing or the services rendered to Russia. So like you have customer service, you have marketing, you have sales, and all three of those combined, some of those are costs and some of those are credits to your entire business. So by cutting all of that out, I'm just saying it doesn't necessarily add up to the market share, which here you pointed out clearly that you can round up to almost 10% market share of their business. It doesn't necessarily mean a 10% dock in revenue, because you can do something dumb like release a buggy game and tank your entire revenue by what was it like 20% in a day. Yeah. Like, so it all like but all of that is to highlight how minuscule the cost actually is, which therefore makes it okay to do it from a business perspective and still not take a huge risk.
From a pure capitalistic perspective, for sure, you can say, oh, we might gain more capital as a result of the goodwill we generate.
Exactly.
Versus, sure. So there is definitely, you are definitely arguing the capitalist reasons for doing it. I do think part of what I was gunning out with this question as well is, though, there's also like, I have to wonder if in the example of specifically NATO, I wonder if there are certain like governmental pressures or obligations possibly even where it's like, hey, by the way, if you expect to do business in our country, then if we go to war or if we impose sanctions on people, we expect you to withhold sales or you might potentially face consequences, right? Like,
yeah, maybe.
So sure. I do wonder if there are certain like, I don't know exactly what like corporate responsibility towards, governments are in general other than taxes, but I do wonder if it's possible there might be like taxes or fees out there if there's like, oh, you didn't do that. Okay, well, we're going to impose this fee on you because you're an American company after all. You should support American interests, or maybe not in America, but possibly in Europe, right? Like possibly in other Western countries. Those kinds of things might exist. And then, of course, there's just the general idea of retaliation, right? The possibility of like the biggest thing that's going to be different in the next major global conflict is the cyber realm, right? Like cyber attacks. We've already seen crazy uptick in DDoS attacks and stuff, and hacking and crypto and ransomware attacks across the country, and it's due to Russian hackers.
Yep,
with an uptick in activity, basically engaging in cyber warfare. Because cyber warfare doesn't have nearly the amount of like retaliatory grounds. Of course, we're doing the same thing to them, undoubtedly, but it's all in an effort to do that. So that leads me into my next question, which is, what are some of the other possible ramifications or consequences that companies and cultures might face if two international markets go to war with one another that don't necessarily involve like sales or not sales. The big things I wanted to highlight were the aspect of a country at war with another country that decides, the one country makes a lot of video games. They might start including a bunch of propaganda in their game, which wouldn't necessarily be, in my opinion, an ethically responsible thing to do. But it might be like, oh, hey, a game company in Ukraine right now might be like, we're going to make a game about how incredible the Ukrainian government is in the face of this Russian threat, and it's going to be about killing Russians and stuff like that. And as understandable as that might be, it's also propaganda, and that can be a dangerous thing in and of itself. I think about neutrality issues, right? Like staying, in an effort to stay neutral, that can also cause some of the problems and things that we're talking about. Cyber attacks, I already mentioned. You might open yourself up to cyber attacks, which could really threaten your business. If for example, it was a big enough deal, right, tax wise, for the all these companies to stop selling games in Russia, they might be like, okay, great, we're going to send our best hackers to just bring down every one of your servers one at a time if we can. And my question is, the government, the American government or Western governments, are they thoroughly equipped to deal with a concentrated cyber attack on behalf of our country's businesses? Because, as much as, sure, those businesses have a responsibility to do it themselves, of course, you should have good cybersecurity. We don't really have a lot of things in regards to standards countrywide, like nationwide, for protecting American businesses. The government has a lot of standards for cyber protecting their assets. But they don't
not necessarily like given out
require that. Yeah, right. Yep. They don't say, hey, Microsoft, you're going to have to, subscribe to these standards by 2025 or whatever, because we're expect to be at war, and we need to make sure that you're protected. That's literally our job as a government. That's why you pay taxes, so we can protect you and tell you that you need to do these things to protect yourself. Like, we don't have that. We don't have that. So it's like a concentrated cyber attack against a national interest could really destroy any one of these companies if they really decided to go after them hard, right?
Yeah.
So and that's the thing. And then of course espionage as well, right? And then the last kind of piece of that is maybe they don't bring them down, but maybe they start planting spies within American corporations in order to either influence things or gather information. Who knows? There's all kinds of possibilities that like a war with a comparable nation could have on video games. Again, maybe they start to gently guide anti-propaganda or propaganda in the other direction to make the enemy country more sympathetic to the people of our country or whatever. There's so many possibilities of things that could happen that we have not had to face yet as a video game industry, as a video game culture, right? Like, this industry has never had to face those things. Movies, sure. Other forms of entertainment, books and all that, book publishers, yeah, they've been through this many times with a lot of these things, except for maybe the cyber attack things. But the video game industry isn't ready for it.
There's actually an example. There's an example out there that we've skirted this. We have put a toe in the water, and I say we as like the gaming industry as a whole. There's a lot of controversy surrounding the development of a video game called 6 Days in Fallujah, which I don't know if we've covered a whole lot on the show, but it's kind of making waves. Yeah, it's a tactical shooter game. I'm going to paraphrase from Wikipedia and make sure I get the facts right. Developed by Highwire Games, published by Victora, slated to be one of the first video games to focus entirely on the Iraqian War. The game's plot follows the squad of U.S. Marines from 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines, fighting in the Second Battle of Fallujah over the span of 6 days back in November of 2004. The premise of the game was the subject of controversy in 2009, with questions raised to its appropriateness, especially given the fact that the true events of the game is based on were recent at the time. Originally published by Konami, but a spokesperson informed the Associated Press Konami was no longer publishing the game due to the controversy. So basically, it's like a telling of, I guess, factual events that happened, which is a story that I would say needs to be told, but it's also extraordinarily inappropriate to like Iraqian people. It could be perceived as propaganda. It's not something you just throw out there flippantly as like a video game that someone's going to be experiencing this extremely serious traumatic situation that affected the lives of so many folks, the United States side, the Iraqian side, whether you're on whatever side of the spectrums politically in wartime, whatever. Like, these are human beings that have went through hell in that situation. And this video game is just coming in and showing that. And in
addition, like, there's going to be a person, there's going to be people out there whose their brains aren't going to interpret that the way it may have been intended. Instead, they're going to see this color person is doing this to me, quote unquote. I'm experienced. They have the empathetic response, but they have the wrong empathetic response in the sense that it's like, oh, people that look like this did this terrible thing. I'm going to now hate and act terribly towards people who look like that, right? Like, and that's such
it's
a
crazy
thing that we still have to deal with.
And that can happen in this war with Russia versus Ukraine, where there's
oh my goodness, yeah, Russian people,
and there's stories that need to be told. Like, what if there is a Russian? I mean, there's lots of stories out there. I'm not trying to be like flippant or insensitive, but there are stories out there of accounts of Russian soldiers. One of them, it was a tank driver who just sold the tank for 10 grand and bailed. Like, he's a soldier who doesn't want to fight for Russia. He's being told to do this. He doesn't like to do it. So he's a detractor. Like, there's Russian soldier detractors that are just like running away. They're giving up. They're not fight. They're refusing to fight. And so what if they made a game about that? And like, that might actually like soft land, but that could also be the influence of Ukrainian propaganda, anti-Russia. And like, like there's so many different.
That's the thing that sucks
how do you
about
tell
war,
these stories?
Right? Is that once it starts, even the quote good guys are bound to act like bad guys at some point. They're bound to do something terrible to the other side, to those soldiers or to the people of that country that probably don't deserve it, I should say, right? The bad guy here is Putin. The bad guy here is the people at the top, his generals and this man that are doing this thing that is terrible. And even then, not all those circumstances are clear cut, right? The cycle of hatred, right? The alliance versus the horde. Someone has always wronged the other one at some point. And so it's like, okay, like the things are very rarely just good versus evil, good guys versus bad guys, despite the fact that we so desperately want them to be. We want them to be because we know in our hearts that the reality is they have just as many reasons for hating us as we have to hate them. And that is why ultimately I think that you are essentially right that war needs to stop because everybody has a reason to kill one another. So if we stop killing one another, then everybody has a reason to find a way to work together, right? Like, right? So I don't know, but at the end of the day, that's the reality, right? Like there's bound to be some circumstance where you could just as easily tell a story in this conflict since it's happened for the last month. I'm sure there are stories you could tell that would make you be like, oh wow, those Ukrainian soldiers did a terrible thing, and those Russian soldiers were victimized as a result, or Russian people. It's just, it sucks, man. That's what war is. War sucks because even the quote good guys, even the country that may be the underdog, the victim, the quote good guys, they're bound to do something in retaliation at some point on a micro level that is monstrous because war makes us monsters, right? But that said, I have one final question. I feel like it's a fairly enough. We could probably be succinct with it, but it's worth asking. In the face of all of this, right? Maybe it's not this conflict with Russia, but at some point, probably while we're still alive, we're going to be facing this with Russia, with China, maybe the two of them together, right? Like they've been cozying up to one another in the last 5 or so years. So what are we, number one, why do we have to think about this? Why is it important to have this conversation now while things are, quote, relatively peaceful? But more importantly, do you think we're prepared? And if not, how do we prepare? As both a culture and as the industry, like, what do gamers do about this beyond just being like, sign me up, I've been practicing shooting my whole life, right? Like, beyond that, maybe possible knee-jerk reactions some might be having. What are ways that we kind of prepare for this, that we prepare either mentally or literally, like, with preparations? What do we do? What do we do?
Video games are now more evolved into a major storytelling medium than they ever have been before. And they brush up against books and movies and music when it comes to
world peace.
I mean, okay, yes. I mean, they could, like, right? They're stories that people can tell. And yes, they can be told fictionally, non-fictionally, just like all of the major ways with which they can also be exploited and used for, like you said, propaganda or exceptionalism.
If novels or movies couldn't do it, then I doubt video games are. But
yeah, I know.
Still.
But so what can we do as gamers? It all goes back to being informed. If you are informed about what the movie industry is doing and you know what production studios are making movies and what those stories mean, checking that against reviewers and different sources and seeing like what this message is, not just consuming it and having a one-sided thought or a conversation with someone and being validated and moving on in your echo chamber, but like being out there and looking at what the story is, figuring out what this game is trying to say, looking at what the companies are doing in their in their contributions, in their revenue, in their business practices, and just being informed if you care. Like, I assume if you're listening to this podcast that you have some sort of invested interest in video games in some regard, whether you're a gamer or not, as we talked about at the beginning. And so the video game industry is bigger than music and movies combined. It makes more money. It churns out more money than those engines do. So it will affect the world. It will affect global markets. It will affect politics, and politics affects it. And so just being informed, and video games are supposed to be a happy thing. We take, it's an entertainment form. It's a storytelling medium, but how we do is we have a responsibility. So just, it starts with being informed, because that is the number one spot where you can make a call, a moral check on yourself and what you're doing. And we can't come up with the answer that is one answer suits all. Everyone's going to have their own convictions and their own life and context with which to approach everything. So just knowing that if I can say everyone is informed and see 6 different decisions, I can say, because those 6 decisions were informed decisions, I can't argue them. Okay, sure. I mean, I could debate them, but I can't call them wrong or judge that person for making that call if I know they're informed. So it just starts with that. And that's the drum that I'll continue to beat.
Yep. I'll say on a practical level, I feel like the biggest thing to come, if you take one thing from this podcast, take this. The next war is going to be fought in the cyberspace as much as it's going to be fought in real space, right? This is the next wartime battlefield, is because as much as we've just talked an entire hour or so about how video games are facing this for the first time, so is the computer industry, so is the cyber industry. They kind of grew in parallel to one another. Mm-hmm. And though we have absolutely been using computers to fight wars, we've never necessarily gone toe-to-toe with a nation that has the cyber capabilities of truly, if they really put their minds to it, using that to impact our daily lives. It's one thing when just a super smart nerd has figured out how to make a living off of stealing money from people using computers. It's a whole nother thing if a government is employing their people who are also super smart and capable hackers of using them as a weapon of war to harm another country's economy. That is a way that war is going to affect your daily life in a way that it probably never has before.
Yeah, it is true.
They're going to use that to sow discord. They're going to use that to again do exactly what we were talking about of make their lives miserable so that they're discontent with their government. Possibly draining my bank account, stealing my identity is going to make me pretty pissed off and not necessarily want to support a war effort, more so just help me with my situation, right?
It's more nefarious than that. It is you scrolling the Facebook feed and seeing a rally against a specific view that you do or do not have, and you being infuriated and radicalized.
The misinformation
that is not even real, because Russia has employed warehouses full of people behind keyboards, churning out social media posts and creating groups and communities that are completely
how Donald
fabricated.
Trump won.
Yes, that's how he won the election. Right.
Russian
and look at how the last
campaigns.
5 years went in America.
Yep. Exactly.
Prior to
how
the
it's still going. How the divides in our country have just been fueled by a concentrated effort by a foreign government to sow discord and weaken our country's strength.
And look at
imagine
overall,
if we're actually at war, then they're going to be ramping that effort up times a million. So
you would think, and our entire divided American society, if you just take both sides and you poll them of their opinion of the government, I imagine just the general opinion of the government on both sides of the court have decreased because of that. Just because
the 100 best case scenario for Putin right now is us in a civil war breaking out in our country, right?
Yep.
Especially if half of our military is dedicated already, or most of our military is dedicated to overseas engagements. If suddenly a war breaks out in our country, that frees Putin up to do
whatever he wants.
Exactly.
Well,
same with China, right? China would love a civil war in our country would certainly affect their economy, but not probably so greatly as a straight up war with them would, right? So our enemies want us to fall apart, and they will employ whatever cyber
in the cyberspace
exactly. They'll employ whatever tactics they need to. And the best one they've found so far is is social media and hacking and all that stuff, right? So Okay,
one last point
time.
to tie. I know we're time.
All right.
To tie all that entire conversation back to video games. You are a person who is involved in the gaming industry, whether it's on Twitch, on Twitter. You're talking to people, influencers. You're interacting with gaming communities around you. This is how you can not be, or you can be helpful, and that is to not be divisive, to not be toxic, to be great to one another, to lift one another up, to not buy into this. That is where. Yes, we're talking about like cybersecurity and cyber warfare and how governments are using propaganda to exploit social media and divide our country to affect our economy and bolster theirs. All of that is related to games. It doesn't seem like it on the surface. You're like, oh, I'm going to Walmart to buy this video game. Or going to GameStop to pick up a game. But you're going to play that game online with friends. And you're going to interact with other people and other groups. Be nice to people. Be a better person out there. Like everyone can be better. We can all lift each other up. We can get each other's backs. And not be divisive, not buy into those
kind,
competitive,
be cool, be
toxic,
chill, and you can save the
gatekeeping.
World. Absolutely,
it does. Like, so do that. Just
that's a good point. Good point.
Public service announcement.
Yeah, good call. All right, fight Russia by being a better person. I love it.
Like absolutely.
So all right, cool. Well, that literally is time. We have no more time left.
That's it. So I'm done. Yep.
Yes, they're the best place to engage with us more, to give your thoughts on this incredibly complicated and difficult to talk about topic. Scary topic, I think. You can go to 80bitpodsmash.com, where you will find links to all of the social medias: Facebook, Reddit, Twitter, Instagram, all the big ones. We're there, so we have a presence there. So you can talk to us about rational or irrational things. You can link to us Russian troll farm posts. We will say that looks like it's from a Russian troll farm, hopefully. Otherwise, you can engage with us, right? And we also have Discord links in all of our chats. You can join our Discord and engage with us literally while we're at our day jobs or hanging out with our kids. It'll buzz our phone, and your thought will be downloaded directly into our brains, pretty much. And so you can go to all those places, and you can also find links to any podcast platform you would prefer to listen on. If you're listening on Spotify and you're like, man, I wish they were on iTunes, we're there. Surprise! Go to 80bit Pod Smash and download us there. We're pretty much on all the major ones. Next week, we are going to be tackling something lighter finally, and we'll be continuing our Wikipedia best games list wherever we've
been a while
left off. It has been a while, so I figured I'd toss that one on there, and we kind of mentally decompress from the very difficult 2 episodes that we'd had, and also a silly one that was fun that we also got to decompress from. So we will see you then to talk about that.
See you next week.